Welcome to the latest episode of Cancelled Horror Games. For the uninitiated, the name of the series explains what this video is going to be all about. So in this video, we will be talking about a game called Black Death, a first-person survival horror game that would have had the player exploring a city covered in a pitch-black cloud of smoke, or fog maybe, which infects people and turns them into monsters. Think the bubonic plague mix of Silent Hill. First, let's dive into some background about the studio. Darkworks was an independent game developer founded in 1998 and based in Paris, France. Or France, if you don't sound like a complete fucking hillbilly like I do. I'd never heard of them before, but after looking them up and seeing what they worked on, I'd realized I had played some of their games. They're most known for developing titles such as Alone in the Dark: A New Nightmare, which was released in 2001, and Cold Fear, which was released in 2005 and published by Ubisoft. I actually reviewed Cold Fear for this channel, so if you like zombies on boats and wisecracking protagonists, you should check that video out. There'll be a sexy as fuck link place where links tend to go. I trust you're smart enough to figure that one out. Darkworks also worked on I'm Alive, but they were only able to work on the initial concept and R&D before the development was handed over to Ubisoft Shanghai in 2009. That game was drastically changed and eventually released in 2012. At the time Darkworks was developing Black Death, they had more than 100 people employed at the company, but developing games wasn't their sole focus. They were also a technology company. During the height of 3D televisions, video game publishers and developers wanted to take advantage of the hardware that in no way would fizzle out in a few years. Darkworks developed Tri-OVIS for games technology, which enabled smooth, stereoscopic 3D conversion of video games and multimedia products. In dumb terms that I can understand, it was software that allowed developers to integrate 3D features into Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and PC games. In June 2011, Darkworks announced they were working on a new survival horror game called Black Death. They released a short trailer and a playable demo of the game's prototype in July of that year, and started shopping it around to publishers so they gained the money and resources needed to bring the game to life. Because, you see, though Darkworks was working on both video games and software for developers, they weren't making a lot of money and became financially unstable. Luckily, their relationship with Tri-OVIS was good enough that the company bought them in 2011. Under their new owners, Darkworks believed they would finally be able to flourish and started working on several video games, including Black Death. What exactly Black Death was going to be is a bit of a mystery. Darkworks did publish some information about the game on their website, which was used while pitching the game to various publishers. Besides that and the gameplay footage, not much else is known. So let's talk about what we do know from the information available. But first, let's go into a bit of a tangent that will pay off in the end because I'm a fucking good YouTuber. From early 2009 to late 2010, an estimated 11 to 21% of the global population contracted swine flu, also known as H1N1. It was spread through the same way this seasonal flu was spread, mainly from person to person through coughing or sneezing. Some symptoms included a fever, dry cough, headache, pain, fatigue, diarrhea, vomiting, and in some rare cases, neurological problems. People at higher risk included those over 65, children under 5, and those with underlying medical conditions. Though no official death toll has been confirmed, it is estimated that between 151,000 to 579,000 people died because of the swine flu. Darkworks stated Black Death would be the personification of the fear generated by recent pandemics such as natural disasters and diseases, and the mistrust which has been associated with their supposed origins. The name of the game was obviously inspired by the bubonic plague, or better known as the Black Death, which struck Europe and Asia in the mid-1300s and killed more than 20 million people in Europe, almost 1/3 of the continent's population. And if you want to get super terrified for a bit, watch a documentary about the Black Death like I did. It is a great way to spend your Friday night. Who needs friends and social events? But since the developers started working on this game only 1 year after the spread of the swine flu, I believe it greatly influenced them. Darkworks released a plot summary of the game while pitching it to publishers. Today, the American Northwest coast, a city is suddenly hit by a massive cloud of smoke. Mysterious swirls of this black smoke appear and infect everybody. This new disease is spreading all over the city, making it a place full of sick people sunk into a comatose state. As they mutate to strange creatures with various powers and group behaviors, they start to become violent and invade the whole city. The player is a survivor who will try and stay alive and wipe out this scourge from the city. The world of Black Death has been consumed by a black fog that is infecting people and turning them into monsters. The infection initially puts people into a coma before gradually turning them into creatures manipulated and contorted by the fog. Judging by Darkworks' inspiration from pandemics and their cause, I think either the military or some corporation would have created the fog. Some of the concept art also suggests this, which I'll get into later. Maybe it was a weapon to be used in combat but was accidentally unleashed on the world, or was accidentally unleashed on the population. Even though I'm theorizing here, I believe science was the cause. Though the world seems like it's over, there are some scientists who are fighting back and trying to find a way to cure the disease created by the fog. From what I can gather, the player would have controlled something known as a biohacker who explores the fog to try try and find a cure for the disease, or at least someone who would help the scientists who are trying to cure the disease. Combating the fog through scientific research would have played a large role in Black Death. Throughout the game trailer, fluoro blue pictures of chemicals from the periodic table can be seen on buildings, and the player even goes to a research lab in an apartment building at one point. Some of the concept art release also shows labs and a shack emitting fluoro blue light from inside, similar to the ones that you see in the gameplay trailer. Curing the infection also seemed to be a major focus in Black Death. The end of the gameplay video states the player would need to decide whether to cure or kill the infected. Though we never see such a decision in the gameplay trailer, the player is seen extracting green gel stuff from one of these monsters by stabbing them with a large fucking syringe in their chest. Release screenshots also show this. When an enemy is severely damaged, they fall to their knees, which I think would have been the moment when the player could kill or cure them. Maybe this gel stuff would go towards a quota, which at the end of the game would determine if the cure was created. I'm not too sure this idea was completely fleshed out when Darkworks was shopping the game around, but what I like about this is that it makes the player look at these monsters not just as monsters, but as people who can be saved. This kind of morality could have been fantastic, as each enemy encounter could make the player feel like they have killed a human being they could have saved. Lots of horror games have science as a big bad which has caused all the problems, and from what I can gather, Black Death does the same as well. But where other titles fight back against the science with guns and explosions, Black Death seemed to paint a greyer picture. Sure, the scientific research may have caused a problem, but it's also the only way to stop the spread of the disease. I like that. It brings something new to the rickety and disheveled table of all scientists and corporations are bad look monsters, gotta kill them all. The black fog was the other major component of this game, and aesthetically it's fucking gorgeous. The fog blankets the sky and slithers through the streets of the environment. The sky is pitch black, with the only light source coming from car lights or emergency service sirens, which have been long abandoned. Bodies of comatose people litter the streets, which at any moment would turn into something truly terrifying. A gamer. In the gameplay footage, the player didn't have a flashlight, so if there wasn't any light nearby, the player could only make out where they were going by blindly walking around and stumbling across objects in the world. This also means trying to see any monsters within the fog is very difficult. Several times in the footage, I could see silhouettes of monsters that would quickly scurry away. All of this I think would have greatly added to the atmosphere and make the player feel paranoid about whether or not a monster was nearby. Or you could also hear the sound of monsters sometimes, but you can never see them, they never popped up. See, that shit's fucking creepy. I think the fog is probably the best part of Black Death. It creates such a dense and thick feeling of oppression that kind of reminds me of Silent Hill, because you know, fog. It would have also been so cool to explore, but it wasn't just used purely as an aesthetic purpose. It would have also been a fundamental mechanic that would have constantly posed a risk to the player. How this would have worked can be seen in the gameplay footage. Breathing in the fog is what has been putting people into a coma and turning them into monsters, and the same thing happens to the player, which is not what you want. When exposed to the fog, the screen slowly becomes consumed with black smudge, which obstructs the player's vision, and they begin to cough. Eventually they will be knocked out. This whole coma thing is a real drag, so the only way the player can explore the environment covered in the fog is with a trusty gas mask. Though it lets the player safely wander through the fog, it also obstructs the player's vision, which adds a nice little layer of this thing can help, but it also comes at a cost. This immediately reminded me of the gas mask mechanic in the Metro series. For those who don't know or don't have good taste in games, Metro is a series set in a post-apocalyptic Russia where nuclear fallout happened, which resulted in lots of radiation and monsters, so the surviving population was forced underground and now lives in the Metro train tunnel system. When the player character or anybody else decides to go above ground, they need to use a gas mask or they'll die. They also need filters for their gas mask, which allows them to breathe, but each filter is on a timer, and once it runs out, it needs to be replaced. If the player ran out of filters or took off their gas mask, they'll die. So now you get why Black Death's gas mask reminded me of Metro's gas mask. And seriously, play Metro, it's fucking amazing. But unlike that game, the gas mask in Black Death doesn't seem to need new filters. There isn't a timer or anything, and filters don't seem to be in the game at all. I have to factor in that the gameplay shown which I'm basing this information off was an early build, so maybe Darkworks planned on implementing a similar mechanic, but considering how much time the player would have spent in the fog, I think it would have been more of an annoyance to have to constantly need filters, so perhaps I would have just gone to go without them, and purely use the gas mask obstructing the player's vision as the only downside. I have mentioned the monsters enough that it's time to actually talk about them. These things look pretty creepy. All the monsters shown emit the fog from their body, which I think was an awesome artistic decision. The most common enemy found are the ones that still resemble humans but have these fucked up glowing eyes. These guys can run around, jump, and altogether move really fast. They seem to be pretty dangerous on their own, as the gameplay footage shows. They're pretty resilient to bullets as well, but they are much worse in groups. Multiple times in the footage, the person who was playing the game had a hard time fighting them and died on several occasions. I can't tell if this was because the person playing was bad at the game or these monsters were really tough. If the person who played this game is watching, I'm sorry for criticizing your elite gamer skills, and skills was spelt with a Z in my script by the way, so you know I'm a real gamer. The player could have also encountered the fog affected enemies in areas where the fog hadn't reached. One enemy is shown, which seems to be a variation of the basic human bad guy. They emit the fog from their chest, which also acts as a shield that absorbs incoming damage. Eventually though, the shield will go down for a short period of time, which allows the player to finally fuck their shit up. Another creature seen is this dude who looks more like a spooky scary monster. Darkworks said the fog would cause the enemies to evolve over the course of the game, and I believe this creature is evidence of that. This guy is coloured dark grey, doesn't really have a face, has big monster claws, and almost forgot, doesn't have any legs, and he uses the fog to float in the air. These guys seem to be a lot tougher than the basic enemies, which is how game design works. Concept art also showed a giant spider looking thing of black fog emitting from its back. This 8-legged freak looks as though it may have been a big bad boss fight, and since the fog is coming from its back, maybe killing it would clear the black stuff from an area. I also mentioned about a minute ago the gas mask and how it's used to safely explore the fog, but the enemies seem to know this and are able to rip the gas mask off the player's face during combat. This adds another layer to combat encounters. Not only do you have to contend with just trying to kill these guys, or if you're a nice guy, cure them, but you have to worry about them getting too close because at any moment they can rip your gas mask off and expose you to the fog. I love this idea because it can completely change each encounter. At any moment the player would have to try and dodge enemies while they scrounge around for another gas mask so they don't die. Though this looks cool in concept, I can see how this could become annoying. From the gameplay video, there doesn't seem to be any inclination that an enemy is going to rip off the gas mask. It just kinda happens. And because the world is so dark and being exposed to the fog clogs up the screen, it seems like it would have been a pain to try and find another one. I think this could have worked better if the enemies couldn't just randomly remove the gas mask, but instead they had to grab the player and you had to like mash a button or something to get them off. Because how it was implemented in the game, it seems like if your gas mask is ripped off, you are basically fucked because you'll either die by the fog or be killed by an enemy while trying to find another gas mask. Overall though, I like how Darkworks use the fog to create unique enemies that would require different approaches. The idea of enemies evolving over time is also really cool. I would have loved to see more of these creatures and how crazy the developers were going to get with their monsters. The ripping off the gas mask thing could have been annoying as shown in the footage, but with some tweaks it could pose a really tense moment and encourage the player to avoid combat altogether. Now we have talked about how the monsters can kill you, let's talk about how you can kill them. Several weapons are shown throughout the footage, including a big fuck off melee weapon, a pistol, a shotgun, and a chemical blower. All the other weapons act like they do in every game, but the chemical blower was Black Death's version of the gravity gun from Half-Life 2 or the Lancer from Gears of War. It was basically the weapon that would have made Black Death's combat distinct. It is a gun made of science. Basically, it is a weapon that can have several different ammo types loaded into it. How the player would have got this ammunition is also through the use of science. You would have collected chemicals that are just thrown around throughout the environment. I guess this community just hates children as much as I do. These chemicals could be taken to a laboratory, put in a chemical mixer, and depending on what items the player had, they could create ammo. The only type of ammo shown for the chemical blow was this blue stuff that had the ability to freeze enemies. Once frozen, these guys could be smashed into pieces, similar to the Winter Blast plasmid in Bioshock. This could have been a pretty fun weapon to mess around with, and I wonder how they could have been used in conjunction with other weapons or other ammo types for the chemical blower. Much like everything else of this game though, we don't know much about this weapon or the other ammo that would have been available. But the idea is very solid and would have been an interesting addition to the themes of science doing bad or good things. I'm very smart, guys. Ammunition also seemed to be in limited supply, so this could mean the game was going to heavily lean on some mechanics from classic survival horror games such as finite resources. Now to talk about the world of Black Death. The only environment shown in the gameplay trailer was a city. This environment really hammers home the idea that shit is fucked. Everything's abandoned, comatose bodies litter the streets, cars are empty, put the black fog on top of that and you have the ingredients for an atmospheric souffle. I don't know why I said souffle, as I've never eaten nor have I ever seen one in my entire life, but that was the first thing that popped into my mind. Black Death was a big fan of the colour black and grey, and I came to this conclusion after seeing those colours everywhere. All the other colours, such as brown for the walls of buildings or yellow for the school buses, all have a very washed out colour palette. This could have been done because horror games are scared of colour, but it also allows the actual bright colours such as the sirens on police vehicles or lights on cars to really stick out. The gameplay trailer also showed that some areas wouldn't be consumed by the fog. I think this would have been a really cool use of levity, as constantly having to deal with the fog without any kind of reprieve could be a pain. I like actually seeing where I'm going. Some concept art showed off other environments that would have been explored in Black Death, but I think most of the game would have taken place in a city. One area looks like a residential area next to a graveyard on the outskirts of the city. Another is what seems to be a tunnel underground, but this could have led to a laboratory or a scientific facility, as the blue lights found near the labs can be seen. Another area looks like a cave of some sort with white lines on the floor that lead to these white beings that look like mummies. I know they're probably not mummies, but if they broke out singing and walk like an Egyptian, I wouldn't be surprised. On top of the cave is some Lovecraft Lovecraft looking black mass bullshit with tendrils extending off its sides. I think this thing could have been an entity that causes the fog or something along those lines, but I'm just spitballing here. The last area shown is an underground facility or tunnel with large pipes running through it and is lit by those blue lights that mean science. We know Darkworks suggested the fog was created by man, so maybe this underground facility was where the fog was created. So far, all we know about the environments of the game would have been set in a city with some nice little trips underground. I wonder whether the devs would have either had some more unique areas to break up the repetition, or use the fog to create some variation, because what was shown could have been pretty repetitive. One piece of the concept art shows a giant black pimple looking thing growing from the ground in the city, so I believe Darkworks was getting their creative juices flowing with how the fog was going to affect the environment, and everyone hates pimples, well unless you're a Dr. Pimple Popper. Yeah, pop. Oh, that's a big one. You gotta pop that one real good. Get it, girl. Get it. With all this work in hand, Darkworks took their idea and continued shopping Black Death around, alongside several other titles they were working on, hoping someone would publish their games. And though I believe Black Death was interesting enough to gain the attention of publishers, no one else was interested. The situation continued to worsen for Darkworks, and in October 2011, only a few months after they were bought by TriOviz, the company ran out of money and was placed into compulsory liquidation. A few weeks after the liquidation announcement, Darkworks closed their doors. In the 15 years Darkworks existed, they were only able to successfully complete and release 2 games. The rest were either cancelled or handed to different developers for completion. And that is the story of Black Death and Darkworks Studios. It is probably the saddest cancelled horror game I've ever looked into because I feel like it had so much promise. Also, it was kind of up my alley of like spooky towns and fog and shit. So yeah, it kind of makes me a bit sad. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you have any cancelled horror games you want me to check out next, please comment below or tweet at me at SunderlandSpook. Also, I have just launched a Patreon, so if you like what I do and want to support the channel while also getting some sweet rewards, please follow the link in the description. Every contribution, no matter how small, helps out so much. Thank you to Sleight of Tongue, Walter, and Devin John Malone. I'll catch you guys in the next video.